Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Anna Samuel. This is the second of 3 videos on how to help our kids navigate gender ideology. In this video, I walk us through some case studies for middle school kids. If your children are older, I have a follow-up video for parents of high school teens, and if your kids are younger, I have a video for elementary school children. I primarily address parents in this talk, but all of you grandparents, aunts, and uncles, and other educators are very warmly invited to listen in. I've also assumed for the most part that you've already talked to your kids about the basics of sex, the birds and the bees, and the meaning of sex as a gift of self. In this video, I am going to help you think through how to talk about trickier issues like gay issues, same-sex parenting, and some gender ideology ideas. Now, if you've already watched the previous video, you can skip the first 10 minutes because I'm going to talk about the 4 pedagogical principles first. These are the guiding lights that I hope all of us can keep in our mind as we talk to our children and really others about LGBT issues. The first pedagogical principle is to speak the natural law. In today's climate, I think the strongest fortress that you can build in your child's mind is rooted in natural law, which is a universal morality that tells us what kinds of behaviors are proper to human persons. Now, many families talk about sexual teachings in terms of their religion's ideas, which is perfectly fine, but I really want to encourage you to speak in terms of natural law. This is also prudent because often kids, when they get older, they might start to question their faith. This is particularly common during the college years when a kid might temporarily shed their faith in order to later on take it up again as their own. But the natural law can fortify them during that vulnerable time of their life. The second pedagogical principle is to speak intimately with our kids. The ideal is to practice conversational intimacy with kids from a young age. One of the reasons I think parents have such a hard time talking to their children about sex in general, but even more so about topics like same-sex attraction, is because talking about sex is such a deeply intimate topic to begin with. You have to already have built up quite a bit of familiarity and closeness with your kid for these topics to even feel natural broaching. So it's really never too late to start, but the ideal is to start from a very young age. The way you build intimacy is through intimate communication. It's about having frequent one-on-one conversations with them about what's going on in their heart and in their mind. You can ask, what's worrying you today? Or why are you so cheerful? Or what did you think about the party? Anything is game. Friend issues, academic difficulties, issues with family members, personal goals. Really what you want to do is work towards becoming a personal life coach. In my household, our younger children began to nickname our private talks talkie talks. They derived it from walkie-talkie because with talkie talks, we're having this private one-to-one conversation. And they use it as a code word too. So one of my kids will say, Mom, I really need to have a talkie talk. And that's code for, I need us to go private into the bedroom with the door locked so none of my siblings bust in on this conversation. And they love this private audience and they ask for it often. Even when, in my opinion, some of the topics of conversation are rather trivial. Try to give them an audience, even when you think that the matter is not that important, because what you're conveying to them is a deep respect for their interior life, and you want them to lead you into their interior world. One day, when you want to talk about something really important to you, then they're going to reciprocate because you already have this great track record of talking to them about their ideas. As children get older, the talks are naturally going to become deeper and in some cases more serious and surprising, especially when they come talk to you about sexual ideas that they might have been exposed to outside the home. It's really important that you not scare them off with your reaction. Try to stay as calm as possible. In your mind, you might be personally horrified about what they were exposed to, but you don't want them to be afraid to tell you about it for fear that you're going to launch out into some sort of outrage. So try to stay calm. And one trick I've learned is that you can ask them what they thought about that thing that they learned about. Ask for their reaction, and this gives you a little time to sort of get your composure and think about what you think about this situation. Basically, you want to convey a deep respect for what they think and let them lead you into their interior world, and then offer them some ideas on how we can think about this. Also, don't worry if you don't have all the answers. Once they're teenagers, they can ask us some really tough questions. And it's perfectly fine for you to say, you know what, that is a really important question, and I need a little bit of time to think about it. Can we talk about it first thing in the morning? And then this gives you time to consult your spouse or read up on what an expert says about it and give them a better informed answer. This is going to model humility to your child, that you're learning just as much as they are, and it shows them that you consider yourselves co-investigators on these truths. The third pedagogical principle is to speak age appropriately to your kids. As the parent, you have to develop a kind of sixth sense or a special prudence to speak what is appropriate for their age. Your child is going to clue you in on what they need to know. It's about letting them take the lead, asking questions, and then answering exactly what they have asked you and not embellishing too much more. If they're satisfied with the answer, then leave it at that. But if they're not, go ahead and take them to the next level of understanding until their curiosity is satisfied. All that said, at Canavox, we have developed some sort of guidelines for how much to expose our kids to. Basically, from the age of 1 to 10, you want to expose them to the truth, goodness, and beauty of sexuality and shelter them from confusing examples. It's about establishing a clear baseline of what is good. So whenever LGBT issues come up at this stage, as the parent or the adult, it's good to keep the truth simple and focus on what marriage is and what marriage is not, and what good friendships look like. Okay, I'll get into examples soon. Then, around ages 10 to 15, you really begin to expose them to some of the lies and the misunderstandings that are out there. So you face the realities together and you try to build the filter with them. So when LGBT issues come up at this stage, lean in, plunge in. You really want to talk about what's going on in the world and remind them of the truth of marriage and sexual integrity. And finally, during the 15 to 18-year-old stage, now you give them more freedom. You're still going to be coaching them behind the scenes, but at this age, they really want and need more autonomy to work these matters out on their own. So let them work it out, and hopefully you're still having a lot of one-on-one conversations behind the scenes so that you can help them think through these issues too. So as you can see, we believe that the middle school years are really the key time to start preparing them for reality and to have a major influence on them. After age 15, they really want so much more autonomy that you're going to be more limited in how much they're willing to hear you out. Now, I know from experience that a lot of parents are going to balk at this because they prefer to protect their children definitely through the middle school years and as long as possible through the high school years too. But on behalf of the Canavox state leaders, I'd like you to reconsider that strategy. We have a saying among the Canavox state leaders: better a year too early than 5 minutes too late. Basically, when they're young, we really believe it's important that parents speak to their kids first about some of the dark things that are happening in our world before the social environment speaks to them. Also, we found that talking to a 10 and an 11-year-old is much easier than talking to a 15 or 16-year-old in the throes of puberty. When they're young, they tend to have more goodwill towards mom and dad, so they're more open to listening to what you're saying, and it's also so new to them that they just sort of sponge it in. In addition, they're not yet tempted by sexual things, so they're not going to feel personally judged or attacked when you bring up these matters. So the 10 to 15-year-old range is really a golden opportunity for parents. Now, the downside of introducing subjects this young is that their intellectual maturity may not be quite ripe for some of these issues. Some of this may be hard to understand or it might go over the head. Don't worry, just plant the seeds early so when they're wide open to the truth, and you'll see that as they get older and as their intellect develops, they're going to remember what you said, and the truth is going to flower in their hearts at the right time. Now, my purpose here is not to make you feel guilty if you've delayed speaking to your older children. Don't worry, it's never too late to start. I'm simply outlining an ideal here. The important thing is to start having intimate one-on-one conversations with your kids and build them up slowly. The final pedagogical principle is to practice a kind of moral balance in your conversations. When we're dealing with very tricky moral issues, I think we have to message a combination of ideas involving showing empathy and mercy towards those who do not understand the truth, but also communicate truth and justice to our kids. Most people are very good at the virtues of the left and they're poor at the virtues of the right, or vice versa. Progressives tend to put much more weight into the mercy and empathy side of the equation, and conservatives tend to put more weight into the truth and the justice side. But I'm hoping that you will try to have a well-balanced and complete answer by hitting upon these 4 areas well. Good, so let's dive into the scenarios, aware, of course, that there's no cookie cutter recipe for what the right thing is to say in each case. My purpose here is not to give you a script, but rather to get your moral imagination going, so when the time comes and you have to answer the question, you've already sort of visualized how someone else does it, and you can apply the pedagogical principles in your own unique way. Okay, I can't stand the boys in my class. I hate school. Or, the girls in my class are so mean. I prefer to just hang out with the guys. Now, this statement may not sound very controversial to you, but it allows us to explore the topic of gender identity and how our children develop a healthy sense of gender. It's important for our children to bond with their same-sex parent and to have close friendships with kids of the same sex. A child who's able to bond with kids of the same sex is subconsciously identifying with kids of the same sex. Subconsciously, he or she will affirm to him or herself, whether they realize it or not, I fit in with the other guys, or I fit in with the girls, or I belong with the guys, or I belong with the girls. Kids who have a hard time connecting with their same-sex peers, or who are distressed over the behaviors that are typical of their gender, may then begin to question their gender identity, or question whether they are adequate as members of that sex. And this can lead to difficulties later on. Now, let me quickly follow up with a disclaimer. I am not suggesting that there's a direct causality here. Okay? Just because your child is having difficulties at school fitting in does not mean that they're going to have a GID, a gender identity disorder. There are plenty of kids who had a difficult time fitting in with their same-sex peer groups at school, who had no problems with their sense of gender later on, and vice versa. There are plenty of kids who were Mr. or Mrs. Popularity at school and who later on developed gender identity disorders. The causes of gender identity disorders are very complex, and I do not mean to oversimplify them. However, speaking as a parent and speaking as somebody who's read a lot of testimonies of people who have GIDs, I think that an important parenting skill today is to keep an eye on how well your child is bonding with their same-sex friends, and to be proactive about it if you sense that there are some budding problems. And you have to be proactive about it behind the scenes, because you don't want to let your child know that you think there's a problem. You don't want to problematize it in their mind. But it may take quite a concerted effort on the part of you and your spouse to sort of help them assimilate, maybe in an after-school activity with kids who like doing certain activities that they enjoy more. You can also make sure that the same-sex parent or a same-sex uncle or aunt or another mentor is available to bond with your child and to give them same-sex inspiration. Just help them understand the skills that they need to bond with other kids at school or in an after-school activity. And on the flip side, maybe your child is one of the popular kids in the class. It's really important that parents explain to kids who are popular that their strong social standing means that they have a responsibility. They have a responsibility to make sure that other kids in their class feel included. Usually the popular kids have no clue that there may be other kids in the class who are having a difficult time. They're feeling excluded or isolated. So it's about bringing this matter to our kids' attention and teach them to be on the lookout so that they can grow big hearts and learn to empathize and reach out to the vulnerable in their midst. They could make an enormous difference in another child's life. One of our mantras at Canavox is that we have a sexual crisis because we have a friendship crisis. We're deeply convinced that if we could succeed at teaching the art of friendship to children and adults of all ages, we would solve many of the gender puzzles that we are facing today. Okay, next scenario. Our neighbors are such kind, fun-loving people and nice moms too. I don't see what's wrong with being gay. So in this situation, I would suggest that you begin by agreeing and affirming the kind things that your child is saying. They are wonderful neighbors. They do seem like nice moms. I love how they interact with little Willow on the playground. And they're both so kind and friendly to everyone. Here's the deal though. Our children need to understand that these same-sex parents deliberately excluded a mother or a father from that child's life. So you could proceed this way. How do you think little Willow ended up in their household? I mean, two women cannot make a baby, right? Only a man and a woman can make a baby. So for little Willow to be there, how do you think she got there? And then let them take a guess, and then you explain it carefully. So Willow could only have come to them in one of three ways. She was either adopted, or one of her mothers was artificially inseminated, or she was made with IVF, with a petri dish, in a laboratory, and then implanted in her mother's womb. And then, of course, you need to go into what each of these things is. Some same-sex couples adopt a child, and adoption is a beautiful, heroic act which aims to give a vulnerable child a second chance at being raised by a loving family. Now, the absolute ideal is for an adopted child to have a mom and a dad. These children already suffered the loss of their parents once. And we know that moms and dads are really important to kids. So while it's kind and sacrificial of these women to adopt, and they mean well, if you think about it from the perspective of the child, this child is suffering a loss a second time by being denied a mother or a father. And you can ask your kid, don't you think these vulnerable children should have the best shot possible at experiencing the love of a mother and a father? And then hopefully they'll agree, right? And then you can say, do you remember though that her mother, Tanya, was pregnant with her? So that means that Willow was not adopted. Willow was created in one of two other ways. She could have been made through insemination, which is when a woman is injected in her vagina with male sperm. Do you know how they get that sperm? Well, a man who was either a friend and donated his seed, or a man who was not a friend but a stranger and sold his seed, he took his sperm out of his body and he put it in some vials, and then he took that sperm to a clinic. A doctor then injected Willow's mother with that sperm. This man who is not her husband and who has agreed to stay out of their family's life. You can say, son or daughter, what is most heartbreaking here is that Willow was created by adults who all agreed and cooperated to keep Willow away from her father, okay? This man basically abandoned his child with the blessing of the mother and the partner and the physician who injected the mom. Willow will never know the feeling of being loved by her dad. She's never going to experience what it's like for him to hug her and to tell her how proud he is of her accomplishments. And he's not going to be there when some guy breaks up with her and treats her badly, and he can tell her how guys really should treat her and how much he loves her. It's one thing for a child to lose a dad to death and to become an orphan by accident, but it's a whole other thing for a child to lose a dad by design, because her own parents chose to create Willow with the express purpose of alienating Willow from her father. This is a very sad thing to do to a child. Now, that may be enough information. I can tell you that when I was explaining this to my 11-year-old daughter, tears began to stream down her face, and she was so upset. She actually stopped me. She said, "That's enough, Mom. Stop right there. That's enough." And she threw herself into my chest, and she was just bawling there. And as I held her while she was crying, I thought, I was sad for her, but I also thought, this is good. This is the right response. It should be absolutely heartbreaking for us anytime adults do this to children. We have become so accustomed as adults to these biomedical engineering techniques that we've lost sight of how inhumane this is for the children. But a child can see that more clearly. Now, I wasn't able to continue with my 11-year-old, but I did sit down with my older child and I explained to her the third way that Willow could have come into their life. And that was through IVF, made in a clinic with a petri dish. Now, with this method, a man sends his sperm to a clinic, and then the doctors take eggs out of Willow's mommy, and then a doctor joins the eggs and the seed in a petri dish to create little embryos. The doctor created little Willow and perhaps a few siblings more in the petri dish. Then, when Willow the embryo was big enough, the scientists put her into her mother's body, into Tanya's body. Then Tanya had a regular pregnancy, and Willow developed until she was born. So with petri dish conception, just as with insemination, again, Willow's mother and her partner and the doctor cooperated and agreed that the father would stay out of Willow's life forever by design. But there's an additional difficulty with IVF conception, and that's the fact that very often scientists make extra baby embryos on purpose, which they know that they will not always want or need. They make extras as backup to make sure that at least one embryo takes and develops well. Then, once they have the embryos that the adults want, they either freeze or destroy any other leftover embryos that are not needed. You can say to your child, as you know, we're pro-life, and we believe that all human life is precious. No matter the size, the race, the sex of the baby, no matter if the embryo has some physical abnormalities, because all life is precious. But IVF doctors do not always see it that way, and a lot of people who use IVF are not told what happens behind the scenes. Willow may have lost several siblings in this procedure. Willow may have little brothers or sisters on ice, waiting to be put into a mother's body or used in research, or waiting to be thrown away. Again, these are terrible things to do to children. So what you're doing is you're teaching your child to look behind the billboard, to look beyond the happy same-sex couple and ask themselves, how did those children get there? What means were used to build this family? Were embryos killed or frozen behind the scenes to get these children? Was a father asked to stay out of the picture? Was a mother paid to keep away? Now, at this point, you're going to have to pivot and teach your child to extend forgiveness and mercy towards the same-sex couple, because your child may be so upset that they may begin to loathe them for what they've done to Willow or to Willow's possible siblings. One of our state leaders shared that when she told her son about how the same-sex women next door had conceived his friend, he was so angry that his first reaction was to ask, why hasn't somebody called the police? Her son's natural instinct was to dial 911 on behalf of the friend next door. So like I said, it's really important that you pivot at this point. You talked about the truth and the justice, the injustice behind same-sex parenting to the child. Now you have to balance it out and help your child extend mercy and forgiveness to the neighbors. Essentially, we need to teach our children to forgive them because they do not know what they are doing. So you explain to them that lots and lots of people in our world believe that this is totally okay, and that these people are busy telling other people, like our neighbors, that they're making all the right decisions. They're very confused and they mean well. They have good intentions. I mean, they still get the fact that marriage should mean babies, and they think, well, since I can't make a baby with my partner, I'll just go and do it with scientists and other volunteers who sell us their genetic material or rent out their wombs. And there are doctors and lawyers and even religious leaders telling them that it's okay to make babies like this. So the neighbors think it's okay. And if we call the police isn't going to understand why we've called them. We live in a society that is very confused right now, okay? It's like they speak an entirely different language, and we have to do all we can to build a bridge. We have to figure out what their language is and what words we can use so that they can understand us, and we soften each other's hearts so that they can see why we think certain things are wrong. So that's why the best thing to do right now is to forgive them and be kind and loving towards our neighbors so that we can build that bridge of friendship and understand their reasons better. And hopefully one day they'll understand and find a way to remedy it. So that's why. That's why we love our neighbors, but we cannot turn a blind eye to the harm being done to Willow and pretend that everything is rosy. So as you can see, as our children get older, the subjects of conversation become more challenging. In the next video, we're going to tackle the high school years when teens are ready to hear the full message. So I'll hope you'll join me for that video too, and I thank you for joining me for this one.